Okay. Welcome everybody to the winter webinar series of the Sierra Club Pennsylvania chapter conservation teams. My name is Jim Wiley. I am the chapter vice chair, and I am pleased to welcome Katherine Garcia from Clean Transportation for All as our speaker today. Please keep your Zooms on mute. We will have plenty of time for Q&A, but you can also put questions in the chat, and I will be monitoring that. Just to put things in context a little bit, we have 8 conservation teams with a Pennsylvania chapter. That's statewide teams that are looking at these issues or topics. Yesterday we had a nice presentation about PFAS and stuff you aren't thinking about, which was co-hosted by the Zero Waste team and the Food and Ag team. And today it's the transportation team that's hosting this meeting. Katherine Garcia is the director of the Clean Transportation for All campaign, working to reduce climate and air pollution from cars, trucks, buses, and ensuring that our communities are walkable, bikeable, and transit accessible. So with that, I welcome, I'll let Katherine share her screen and we can get going.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. I am Katherine Garcia. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the director of Sierra Club's Clean Transportation for All campaign. And I will share my screen. Okay.
Looks good.
Thank you. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of background about my role here at Sierra Club. I actually used to work at, when I first joined Sierra Club, I joined the Sierra Club California chapter, which is based in Sacramento, California, and we run the state regulatory and legislative advocacy, and is one of the many chapters based in California, because California actually has more than one chapter across the state. And then I joined the national team in 2020, and then I started in 2021 as director of the Clean Transportation for All campaign. So excited to meet you all today. Excited to have this conversation. It's an exciting time for clean transportation, given all of the tremendous investments from the federal government related to both the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and also the Inflation Reduction Act, which was signed last year. So a lot of exciting times, but given that this is my first time presenting to the Pennsylvania chapter, I did want to give a brief overview of the work I lead and the team that we have. So with that, I will, this is a quick agenda, so I'll provide a campaign overview and then talk a little bit about the Inflation Reduction Act provisions. Those are a little bit more consumer focused. So, you know, how much of an incentive can you get for purchasing an electric vehicle, for installing charging infrastructure? If you have a business, how much can you personally save? And then there's also some provisions that are a little bit more focused on engagement with other entities, such as courts and warehouses and transit agencies. And then we'll be focusing on a little bit of the Inflation Reduction Act modeling, which our analyst team has put together. So essentially, where do all of these investments get us in terms of meeting our climate goals? And then the inflation, then we move into the IIJA, which is the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And then I'll end with some resources that we've compiled as a team. So first, just kind of a table setting here. Transportation accounts for the largest source of U.S. carbon emissions. So we have we have a big role to play in, as Jim mentioned at the top of the call, we're really focused on slashing emissions from combustion engines. So that's cars, trucks, and buses. We do that through strong regulations, but also making sure that there's incentives so that for folks that are either purchasing a vehicle for their family or purchasing a vehicle for their business, making sure that there's incentives so that those EVs are priced competitively with the fossil fuel alternative. We also want to make sure that there's sufficient charging infrastructure to support the advancement of electric vehicles. But we know that we aren't going to meet our climate goals by continuing to drive the same number of miles that we drive today. And so, of course, for those people who choose to drive or need to drive, we want to make sure that they're able to access the cleanest car possible. But we also want to be investing in public transportation, in active transportation, such as walking and biking, and making sure that that service is reliable and safe. So that's a big part of our campaign as well. And then in particular, I think it's important to have this last bullet point as it relates to a lot of the investments that we're seeing from the federal government. They're really trying to encourage more clean energy jobs in the US. But with that, we should have good labor standards. And so that's something that's a big priority for Sierra Club. And it's also a priority for our campaign as well, given the number of auto manufacturing and supply chain jobs that are coming with both continuing to clean up combustion engine cars and then the transition to electric vehicles. And I should say at the top, Jim's going to be monitoring the chat. So if anyone has any questions, I can pause and add clarity, or if you have any questions, and I'd be happy to answer it since it's a smaller group today. So I just have a couple of slides that relate to our goals. So we are focused on slashing transportation emissions and really accelerating the adoption of electric cars, trucks, and buses. We want to be tracking this. ZEV state is basically states that have set regulations that are stricter than the federal government. So we're tracking that. We're looking at the number of EVs on the road. We're making sure that there's strong state and utility infrastructure investments as it relates to EV charging. And then this indirect source rule is basically a regulation that encourages ports and warehouses to adopt cleaner equipment, cleaner trucks. And that started out in California, and we're seeing some interest in different areas because statistically, ports and warehouse areas, because of the amount of freight traffic, are seeing disproportional amounts of vehicle pollution in those areas. So that's an area of interest for us. As I mentioned before, reducing vehicle miles traveled by improving access to biking and walking and access to reliable and frequent public transportation, whether that's rail or buses or light rail. And then tracking safe streets initiatives. So making sure that, if we're putting in a bike lane, that it's a safe bike lane, that the bike lanes connect to different areas, and that they're safe and easy to get to. And then in terms of clean energy manufacturing and electric vehicle manufacturing, making sure that we have strong worker protection and high wage union jobs. We have some close relationships with unions, and we're recruiting more labor and economic justice advocates to this work. And we really lean on, we have a national director. His name is Derek Figures. He leads the labor and economic justice team. And so we work really closely with him on this work. And so I mentioned these before, but in terms of this year in particular, given the interest the EPA, the federal EPA has on truck regulations, car regulations. We're tracking those closely. We're going to be engaging in those rulemakings this year. Their EPA is about to initiate regulations that will push for cleaner standards as it relates to cars, trucks, and buses. So we're engaging on those and participating in hearings, and we're going to have comment period that we're engaging with action alerts. In terms of, we'll talk in a little bit about the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, but that is really spurring the amount of investment in charging infrastructure at the state level, and that's specifically for what's called the National EV Charging Initiative, which is increasing the number of fast chargers that are on highways. But we also want to be working with utilities to make sure that they're making investments in the community. We want to make sure that cities are putting in public infrastructure, and we want to make sure that there's incentives if people choose to put in chargers in their garage or their driveway, that there is a support network there to help people make those investments in their home. So, and then obviously increasing access to zero emission transit and school buses. That's a big part of the Infrastructure Act. So really leveraging those federal dollars, making sure that there's broad awareness about those programs, and helping to support volunteers that are active in those in that advocacy. We're also working at the local level to make sure that there's active transportation. As I mentioned earlier, we have an initiative where it relates to port and warehouses. And then we have an auto accountability campaign. And so essentially what that means is we are pushing automakers to make more electric vehicles. There are certain manufacturers that are lagging behind, so putting pressure on them that, you know, we really need to have more range of different types of electric vehicles. We need to make sure that automakers are making electric vehicles that are what people want to buy. So, you know, whether somebody wants to buy a smaller car or a larger car, you know, making sure that there's a good variety of EVs in different sizes, and also making EVs more affordable. So we do that by putting pressure on the automakers and making our presence known and engaging around those issues. So I'll start in with the Inflation Reduction Act. I'll move through these pretty quickly, and then we'll get into discussion. But essentially, there is a program by the Department of Transportation to make sure that communities can improve walkability. And this is, we are tracking these carefully. A lot of the Inflation Reduction Act programs have not been announced yet. One of the things that we have been doing as a team with us and Sierra Club and our partners, we've been engaging on the request for information process. So we've been submitting comments to let the federal government know how they should be designing these programs, and how to make sure that equity is a key part of these program designs, making sure that the money doesn't just go into the state to expand another highway or to build another highway, that it's really used intentionally so that the investment benefits the communities that need it most. So this is a program that we're tracking very carefully, and we'll have information once once DOT, Department of Transportation, announces dates that the states can apply. We'll be tracking it carefully. The Inflation Reduction Act also had $3 billion for the U.S. Postal Service. Some of you may know that Sierra Club and many other organizations have been actively pressuring the U.S. Postal Service for many years to electrify their fleet. A couple of years ago, they made a big announcement saying that they were really committed to continuing investing in gas-powered trucks, mail and postal trucks. And we really called them out on it because a lot of these vehicles have a very short route each day and actually park at a very central location where there could easily be charging infrastructure. And we, in terms of our analysis and our advocacy, we definitely made it very clear that these are common sense transitions where, you know, obviously some vehicles are a little harder to electrify. This type of vehicle is the perfect case to electrify. So for a long time, the U.S. Postal Service said that they just couldn't afford it. And then part of our advocacy for the Inflation Reduction Act was having this $3 billion to specifically go towards the transition of zero emission delivery vehicles and also the charging infrastructure to support those vehicles. So essentially, U.S. Postal Service now has the money to make this transition. And then in a complete reversal at the end of last year, so December of 2022, the U.S. Postal Service did make a commitment that they were going to completely electrify. And so obviously a lot of that is thanks to our advocacy and this funding, which is so critical for making this transition. So according to the Postal Service, by 2026, all of the new postal services, postal delivery vehicles that enter their fleet will be electric. We have not just simply, you know, walked away and called it a win. Obviously we celebrated, but we are dedicated to making sure that they follow through and to be tracking it to make sure that they actually do deliver and start to electrify their fleet. And then this is where it really comes to the personal incentives. We were really delighted that this is the first time that there's been a national used EV tax credit. This is really important because Americans are 3 times more likely to purchase a used vehicle over a new vehicle. Very few people actually buy new vehicles. And so this is really going to ensure that we're building up the secondary market for used EVs. And I think we'll get more people into electric vehicles by having this $4,000 tax credit. And of course, there are requirements for those vehicles. They need to be under a certain price point. It is $25,000. They need to be sold officially by a dealer, and those dealers are trained to know, you know, that there is a tax credit and how eligibility works. So we're tracking that closely and definitely excited to share that that used EV tax credit went into effect on January 1st, and it's a great benefit to the Inflation Reduction Act. In terms of the $7,500 tax credit for new EVs, that is a little bit more complicated. There are certain requirements that a manufacturer has to meet in terms of where the contents of the battery came from, where the actual vehicle was assembled. So the IRS does have a webpage, and we link to it in our documents here. But we're able to share some information in terms of which vehicles are eligible. And then there are income requirements as well for people who are interested in that tax credit. They have to meet a certain threshold. So I will add that is really the best way to make sure that there's equity in the incentive. We want to make sure that the people who need the tax credit the most are taking advantage of the tax credit. So our commitment is that we are raising awareness and engagement with consumers about these tax credits, also emphasizing that these are stackable. So in some areas of the country, there's state incentives, and that can be added, like additive to the federal incentive. And then also some utilities are offering incentives as well. So we're excited to share that. And then there are tax credits for businesses as well. And we are making sure that that information gets out to the public and to members, Sierra Club members, so that they can share that information too. I also wanted to talk a little bit about building electrification. Sierra Club does have a partner campaign specifically focused on building electrification, and they've been doing their own Inflation Reduction Act webinars. But just as it relates to EVs, I wanted to share this slide This is actually a really beautiful slide. I think it's a watercolor of all the potential savings from the Inflation Reduction Act in terms of rooftop solar and having a heat pump and an induction stove. So it's kind of the whole house all together. But for the purpose of transportation, there is a 30% credit for installing EV charging, and that's specifically for low income or rural community households. And then in terms of the breaker box, a lot of people who do, if they decide to buy an EV and they're thinking about charging it in their home, even if they have a garage, one of the things that people have to check is to see if they have a breaker box that will handle the load. And that doesn't just apply to EVs, it also applies to new electric appliances. So it's something to be aware of. And the IRA is offering a $4,000 rebate with a specific threshold that will be covered for low income households, and then a smaller threshold that will be covered for moderate income households. So that's another exciting incentive from the Inflation Reduction Act. And then I talked a little bit about auto manufacturing a little bit earlier. This is a $3 billion loan program from the Department of Energy that is specifically focused on supporting businesses that are manufacturing zero emission vehicles, and these could be cars, trucks, or buses. And so we're working with manufacturers to make sure that they're aware of these benefits, and also engaged in the program design. Again, the Department of Energy has been interested in hearing our feedback in terms of what would make this program most beneficial, and so that's something that we're tracking as well. And then this is another, incentive for medium and heavy duty commercial electric vehicles. There's actually an element here for workforce training as well, which is very important as we move into these new clean energy jobs. And we've been engaged in this as well. So tracking how the federal government is going to be implementing this program design. This has not started yet, so we've been tracking it very closely to see which vehicles will be eligible, what kind of businesses will be able to apply for this funding to help them transition to electric vehicles. And then this one is also very similar, but it's specific to port equipment. And this is, as I mentioned before, really important because it's obviously, there are many frontline groups that are located in port areas. And so we want to make sure that we're reducing diesel emissions from freight communities. And then this is also a tax credit for qualified commercial vehicles that are specific to light duty cars. Okay, so where does this get us? Obviously, this is billions and billions of dollars for zero emission cars, trucks, and buses, and the charging infrastructure to support it. And our analyst actually put these, our analyst has been tracking these reports from a research firm called Energy Innovation. There's been a lot of study related to what essentially would have been business as usual, like where the curve is as we move from now, essentially from 2020 to 2030, what would have been business as usual, and how does the Inflation Reduction Act actually move the needle? So you can see here that the Inflation Reduction Act really does increase the number of battery electric vehicles on the road as it relates to cars, and then as it relates to buses as well. So this really is an important slide for us to show how important it is to make sure that the funding is being used as quickly as possible. So we're changing that trajectory of number of electric vehicles on the road. And then in this one, you can see this is specifically focused on trucks. So this incentive funding is just critical for getting more electric trucks on the road and therefore reducing the amount of diesel pollution that's in our communities. So this again is from 2020 to 2030 from Energy Innovation. And then, so in terms of analyzing this, what we see is that there is basically a threshold of how much we will get in terms of transportation emissions reductions just with the Inflation Reduction Act, and then also with regulations. And so that's why we are really focused on the regulations as well, because we do actually need to move industry to make sure that they're reducing the number of combustion trucks and combustion cars. And so we feel that by leveraging the Inflation Reduction Act and the IIJA funding, and then also moving with more stringent regulations, then we'll actually be able to meet our transportation emissions reductions goals. Okay, so I just have a couple of slides for the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, just kind of the key campaigns that we're leading. So one of them is the electric school bus campaign. Our campaign rep, Eric Willitson, really leads this. So he's been working with chapters on getting them involved with advocating for electric school buses. Last year, there was $1 billion that was awarded from the EPA. And we made sure that every single state, a school district from every single state applied. What's interesting about this specific program is that while it does accelerate the adoption of electric school buses, school districts can decide what kind of bus they want to purchase. It just has to be a cleaner school bus. And so one of the things that we, really focused on our campaign was making sure that the advocates that were working with school districts were really explaining the health and environmental benefits of electric school buses versus CNG buses or propane buses. And so we're delighted to realize that after the first year of this program, 2022 was the first year, 90% of the applications that were submitted from school districts were actually for electric buses. So that was a huge win in our book. And we were delighted to see the incredible enthusiasm from both school districts and families, and also the EPA, because they've really been touting, the success of this program, and have been actually doing a bunch of different events where they have key members of the administration, and then have an electric school bus and kids, and are really able to talk about the benefits of electric school buses. In 2023, the EPA will be running a grant and a rebate program, so we'll be engaging as well in this second year of the program. And the program is going to last 5 years as part of the IIJA. And then finally, we're working to electrify the transit bus fleet. So not only do we need reliable buses and frequent buses, but we need electric buses as well. And so the Department of Transportation has been running a program for many years that helps transit agencies electrify their buses. But now that the IRA passed and there's more money from the Inflation Reduction Act or the IIJA, there's actually more transit buses now. And so we're able to encourage transit agencies to apply for this funding. And our goal is to increase the number of zero emission buses that are applied for in 2023. So that is an active campaign. Transit agencies are applying for these buses now, and they will be applying. The deadline for applying for these buses ends in April. So our lead, again, Eric Willitson, has been reaching out to chapters that are interested in engaging with transit agencies to see if they've applied and making sure they're not leaving money on the table. So then in terms of resources, The Clean Transportation for All campaign, my team has put together an engagement toolkit. This is a toolkit that has been a living document. We launched it in the fall of last year. And we are really hoping that that the toolkit is useful for knowing which agencies are facilitating the various programs, how much money is available, in terms of, when there's consumer criteria for purchasing some of these, whether it's EVs or chargers, if they're income-based, making sure that that information is available. And this is a toolkit that's public, so it's available for Sierra Club chapters, but also partners as well. And so I have the link here, and we'll be sharing these slides in a little bit. And so this is just a couple of other resources that we put together that we have found helpful. The lobbying and advocacy team for states, it's a team at Sierra Club who the lead is, her name's Jem Hensley. Her and her team have created this funding hub, which is also a very helpful spreadsheet. This actually goes beyond clean transportation. So there's, the benefits for building electrification and clean energy and housing. And there's just a whole host of different programs that are detailed there. And then we also have a couple of partner resources. So the Blue Green Alliance, which Sierra Club is a part of, they have put together a user guide, and this user guide is really mainly focused on the labor aspects of the Inflation Reduction Act, but there's a lot of information there that's helpful. And then Rewiring America actually has a calculator for essentially putting in your information, your zip code, where you live, a little bit more details about you personally, and then it'll share what kind of incentives and rebates that you're eligible for. And with that, I will stop sharing and we can start discussion. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Catherine. I invite everybody to add their questions in the chat for right now, and to avoid us talking over each other, but we can certainly open it up in just a minute. So let me start, Catherine. Chris asked, do you have any positive or cautionary tales about electric vehicles in cold weather, I guess, particularly like buses and trucks? And do you see any real solutions for the range that drops in cold weather?
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And I think it has affected all types of vehicles, so cars, trucks, and buses. We are getting further along. There's actually some, in terms of our electric school bus advocacy, there was a case study where there was a town in Alaska that was using electric school bus. And so we are getting there. I think a big part of it is really knowing the range and having reliable charging infrastructure to make sure that we're always ahead of that range anxiety. Because you're right, like with the extreme cold weather, it can reduce the range. So I think we are further along than we were 3 years ago. But that's still a strong consideration for using electric vehicles year-round.
Have you seen any products that are differentiating themselves, saying we're better at dealing with cold weather?
It's kind of case by case. For this particular one, for the electric school buses, like that's a particular case. I think we are in a very different place than we were in 2020, and so. I can share some resources after in terms of like the vehicle types, but we're still getting there. But there's been a lot of success in terms of both transit buses and school buses.
ANTONELL.
All right, thanks. Fred asked, is the Sierra Club talking about supporting Senator Warnock's bill to allow automakers who make EVs a grace period to build their EV manufacturing plants in the US For instance, Kia and Hyundai make great electric cars, but had the tax credit taken away from them when the Biden signed the IRA because their cars are built in South Korea.
Yeah, that's a good question, Fred. I don't actually know if we have taken a position yet. I'll need to ask our federal policy team, and I can get back to Jim and actually get you an answer to that right away.
Antoinette asks, PennDOT has delayed the request for proposals on the first round of interstate corridor charging stations. Any ideas why and when the agency will get back on track?
I don't know. I hadn't heard that. Jim, do you happen to know?
I don't.
You don't.
If somebody else in the audience knows anything info on this, come off mute and help us out.
I can reach out to Tom too to see if he has any connections there.
Okay. Fred asks, Norway has lots of EVs and it's cold there. They are managing. I guess that wasn't a question. Any other questions? You can raise your hand if you'd rather do it.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Garrett.
Do you have a recommendation for what do you think is the path of least resistance for a municipality to engage in some of these EV benefits, whether it's like electric vehicle, police cars or just charging stations or anything along those lines?
Yeah, over the years, different states have actually created municipal kind of toolkits. Like our team. So there's one that's like state specific. I am specifically thinking of the one in Virginia. So Virginia actually, it was engaging with different municipalities and seeing how they could come to commitments. So essentially saying, by 2030 or by 2035, all of our municipal fleet will be electric. So that's one strategy. New York City has a bill right now that we're supporting where they have said that by 2035, all of their municipal fleet will be electric. And so we're tracking that carefully. So that's another strategy of having that like ordinance. And then we actually, Sierra Club has released a report called the Policy Toolkit. It's very recent. It actually was just finalized, I think, in January. And I might be able to actually just put that in the chat. But it essentially has, what are the different ways that municipalities and states and businesses can be electrifying their fleet. But that's a great question. It really just there's a whole range, and I'd be happy to provide Jim if maybe when you send around the slides, we could share those documents.
No problem. And let me tag on to that on terms of municipalities doing projects or enabling policy that inspire the community to get more EVs. I've seen, at least around my area, municipalities are putting in level 2 charging stations at public parks or at municipal buildings and stuff. To me, that's not really the priority. People, in order for people to make the decision to buy an EV, they need to be able to charge at where they live, right? And so I think municipalities should be looking at barriers for people that don't have off-street parking, to help with multifamily housing to get more charging stations or, row houses and stuff like that. Do you know of any resources along those lines?
Yeah, that is actually pretty core to our work in different municipalities in terms of, that's really when you get to like the equity level. So people are more likely to charge at home if they have a garage or a driveway. But it's more low income people that live in like either multi-unit dwellings, apartments. And so for that, we really rely on the utility engagement, and our environmental law program is pretty engaged making sure they're pushing utilities to invest in charging infrastructure. But getting back to what Garrett was saying, the municipalities, they have huge fleets, and often those fleets actually charge at a central location. And so there's a whole host of reasons why it's really beneficial for businesses to go electric, particularly, especially if you're a municipality, because you could have like fuel savings. A lot of municipalities are required to buy new vehicles. And so then it would introduce more used electric vehicles into the secondary market. So I think there's a lot of benefits to both charging infrastructure and also focusing on advocacy to electrify municipal fleets.
Okay, and as far as like a path of least resistance, right? Like if you have to start somewhere, you know, like I know top-down goal setting is good in some ways, right? But as far as just like getting the foot in the door, it sounds like from a municipal perspective, either working with local businesses, apartment complexes, things like that, to help encourage them to set up charging stations, support the permitting or whatever activities need to be there, or maybe just jump straight to their own fleets. It sounds like there's not really much of a middle ground. Is that correct?
I mean, I think there is a middle ground, because it might just require some conversations in terms of, you know, will you consider the next time you buy a new vehicle to have it be electric? You know, like that would be probably the best way to approach this, as opposed to
Just
saying,
start planning ahead.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because these municipalities generally purchase their vehicles in cycles. And so you wouldn't want to just demand and swoop in and say, like, every car you have in your fleet should be electric tomorrow. You know, you'd say, like, can some of them, the cars you purchase in 2023 or 2024, can those be electric?
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. That's a good place to start. It's just evaluating the cost and over time, right? So spreading the costs out over time is basically additional investment. So just a delta over what they were going to spend anyways.
Exactly. And what they really need to figure out is what the cost savings are. So, you know, and what happens sometimes that I've heard with municipalities is that sometimes the department that's purchasing the vehicle is not talking to the department that's operating those vehicles. So the department that operating the vehicle will actually realize the fuel savings and the maintenance savings, and they'll, you know, get to benefit from that. But the department that actually bought the vehicle just sees that sticker price. And so getting those departments to talk to each other is really important, and you know, explaining, you know, these are cars that will help, you know, the municipality, you know, reach their climate goals. You know, they're improving air quality, they're saving on the cost of fuel, they're saving on the cost of maintenance.
Right.
So all of those reasons together.
And do you have a toolkit or a resource like case studies on police vehicle or any kind of municipal fleet savings?
So let me, I'm going to put this in the chat here. This is specifically what we're calling our EV adoption toolkit. And it does have some case studies in terms of which municipalities have already done this kind of thing. I don't actually know offhand which types of vehicles are like the best to electrify first. I will say, as a personal anecdote, I live in Washington, D.C., and all of the parking enforcement vehicles are electric. And so clearly, you know, because those are driving around all day and sometimes idling, they kind of went with those first.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I've seen those more than something like you know, I haven't seen any electric police cars.
Okay.
All right,
Thank
thanks,
you.
Garrett. Thanks, Catherine. Let me get some other people in here. Fred had his hand up. What's up, Fred?
Catherine, I was just wondering, in March, the IRS will issue guidance on battery components and minerals in electric cars, and it may mean, for more cars will not qualify. So, I mean, I'm kind of crossing my fingers that they'll delay that for 6 months or something. It seems kind of onerous, you know. Have you heard any word on when we might get the guidance from the IRS in March related to that? And is there any way that, that can be delayed?
I have not heard when it's coming out. I will say that this is a contentious issue. And one thing for me personally, we work at the Sierra Club, and we take land protection very seriously. And so, there's other advocacy groups that, they're specifically focused on getting as many EVs on the road, and, they might take certain positions when it comes to how to do that, how to incentivize vehicles, how to push for more mining development. But because, we are the Sierra Club, we have a different approach than some of the other advocacy groups. So when we have advocated for incentives and battery manufacturing, we have really focused on the entire supply chain. We've talked about the importance of making sure that there's investment on battery recycling. So we're conserving the raw materials and really making sure that there's a circular loop when it comes to battery manufacturing. And that is in the works, but we're still pretty nascent in that work. The other thing that we're really focusing on is the reform of the mining law. So that's something that Congress can do, so that we're not making the mistakes of the past, with kind of replacing one extractive industry with another extractive industry. The mining law that governs our country is from 1872, and it really is outdated. And especially now that we're talking more about lithium mining and copper mining, it just really is a key important issue that we need to cover. So Sierra Club, other groups such as Earth Justice and Union of Concerned Scientists are all very keen on this issue, and making sure that it makes sense for our country, in terms of how we're still protecting land and how we're not essentially making the same mistakes in the past.
Thanks, Fred. Chris asks if the post office vehicles if the manufacturer's been chosen or who's bidding on it.
I don't actually. No, that's a good question. So initially, when it came out that when the U.S. Postal Service announced that they were going to continue purchasing gas vehicles, that contract was with Oshkosh. It was Oshkosh, Wisconsin, but then they were going to open a new plant in, I think, South Carolina. And so we actually were concerned about that because the workers in Oshkosh, Wisconsin are union, they're UAW workers, and then the manufacturing workers in South Carolina are not. And so that was part of our organizing, was actually with UAW to fight for a new contract. And so I don't know where they're going to be manufacturing those vehicles, or if they're going with another contract. That's kind of why at the beginning I was saying, like, we're tracking this very closely and making sure that they actually move forward on their commitment. So we're tracking that.
Okay, thanks. And Antoinette asks, are the tax credits for used EVs restricted to U.S. final assembly rules? And if so, are the IRA tax credits may end up frustrating taxpayers for want to make the switch?
Yeah, so I think the easy answer is, oh, sorry, I read that wrong. So the tax credit for used EVs is not subject to final assembly rules. It's just, it's not, because they have to, the final assembly rules started the day the bill was signed, which was in 2022. And then there's, for used EVs, that's a completely separate. I will say though, and I actually have a good article about this that I can share after. The important thing to know about the used e-vehicle tax credit is that it can only apply to the car once. And so if you know, Antoinette, if you were to buy a car in 2023 or 2024 and it's used, and that's the first time that car has been eligible for the tax credit, and you were to sell it in 3 years, that person, the seller, excuse me, the buyer cannot take advantage of the tax credit again. So I think that's where it is a little bit restrictive, because you have to be tracking how many times has the car been sold.
I'm pretty sure that you have to purchase the car through a car dealer. You can't get it from Uncle Joe.
You do. Yeah. So it is, I think it is frustrating. There's a lot of logistics and requirements. I will also add, you know, it's been basically, for people who want to buy an EV, they kind of have to do their homework. We're hoping that dealers can be supportive and to be helpful. Not all dealers are. So we're really, this is one of our other asks for automakers, to like make sure their dealers are trained and have vehicles on the lots that are charged, so that you can really experience the test drive. So it's a really good question. There was a little bit of uncertainty right when the bill passed, but in terms of requirements, they are not eligible for, they're not subject to the final assembly rule.
And I think that's a role that we can play, Sierra Club volunteers, to help push out correct information and share direct people to those resources. Any other questions for Katherine today? All right, let me put up a couple of close-up slides. Where is it? So thank you, Katherine, for sharing all that great information. A couple of contact links for you, which I'll include in the follow-up email. You can get in touch with or learn about all of our conservation teams on this Sierra Club Pennsylvania website, and find your local group as well to volunteer. And I've put Katherine's email address there. The next transportation team meeting is, this is our statewide clean transportation team meeting, is Wednesday, March 15th. I'll include a link for you to register for that. I don't think I've put up the campfire yet, but I will do that before I send out the invitation. And yeah, thank you all. And Katherine, did you have any closing statement you want to make?
Thank you for joining us and for your interest. And if you have any questions or anything I didn't cover that you think about, please feel free to email me. I also work very closely with Jim and Tom. We're on monthly meetings, and so I'm able to share our federal updates on a regular basis. Oh, so Antoinette just asked, do the used EVs have to be made before 2023? That's a question I'll get back to Jim on that and get back to you directly on that. I think that's the case. No, so you know what, now that I think about it, they don't have to be made before 2023. The vehicles, that is an incentive for the first time it's sold. So I don't think that that's true. It just can't be an incentive buyers take advantage of the first time they buy the vehicle. Does that make sense? There is, yeah. That the sticker price of the vehicle has to be under $25,000. Yeah.
All right. All right, let's try to wrap this up.
Okay.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.
Yep. If you have any further questions, contact me and I'll be glad to pass them along. And there we go. Let me stop the recording.